on to our second panel discussion of the morning, application blockchain. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator. Please welcome back to the stage Phil Long of Miller Thomson.
Thanks very much. I'm just going to ask the panelists to just step up, come up on the stage. We'll just get this started. We'll get you some mics. So this panel is on application blockchain. We're going to hear about what these guys do in terms of their applications, but also more broadly where applications are going, where the technology is going, and where it's actually going to impact the world. All right, so first I'm just going to ask everyone to briefly, because we are short on time, briefly tell us who you are and what your company does.
Hey everyone, it's pretty loud. My name is Beier. I'm a co-founder and CTO of First Coin Capital, which is recently acquired by Galaxy Digital of New York. It's a diversified merchant bank that multiple business lines with asset management, trading, principal investment, and advisory kind of capital market service. Yeah, that's me.
I'm Chris Horlacher, co-founder and CEO of Equibit Group, and we're building a new blockchain protocol based on Bitcoin called Equibit, and it's designed to be a direct substitute for back office support services like transfer agents and custodians.
My name is Matthew Spoke. I'm the founder of the Aon Foundation. We are a open source research and development organization focused on building the Aion protocol, a new blockchain system for more scalable smart contracts.
My name is Blair. Can you guys hear? Thank you. My name is Blair Lowther. I'm EVP Corporate Development and Legal for Blocpal International. We are a cryptocurrency payment processor that allows merchants to accept cryptocurrencies. For now, we work with Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Litecoin, and Ethereum. And we allow those merchants to accept cryptocurrencies and then automatically convert to fiat or hold the crypto and convert later or move in and out of other cryptocurrencies.
Hey guys, my name is Niloo. I'm an instructor at Blockgeeks. We are a blockchain education company working on basically training developers to become blockchain engineers and kind of filling the gap between the demand for blockchain technology and blockchain engineers and kind of the supply.
All right, thanks. So I'm going to set this off, but I'm going to invite all the panelists. I'm going to ask a question, but everyone jump in. Let's make it more of a conversation. So I guess the first thing I want to ask is, outside of blockchain and cryptocurrency and maybe identity, some typical things, where do you see, what do you see as real cool applications for blockchain?
I'd be happy to talk about my own application.
You can do so.
So Equibit is focused on what we call crypto securities, and it's basically a secure token. But rather than using something as complicated as a smart contract to represent securities, we took the view that these are really dumb contracts, and you can create these and move them around right in the protocol layer itself. And so Equibit allows for the registration of any number of forms of equity or debt into its network, and that those assets take on the characteristics of a cryptocurrency. They move around from one wallet to the other subject to transfer restrictions if the issuer wants it, and they can use the system to essentially operate as their own direct registration system. So you're interfaced directly with your investors through the wallet. You can send them messages, they can reply to polls, you can also distribute your earnings. So it was really, we wanted to take the whole primary and secondary market relationships and stick them into a decentralized environment. And this is this is right now handled by organizations called transfer agents and custodians who cost in the industry roughly, in excess of about $15 to $20 a year. But it's a market that's tremendously ripe for disruption with blockchain technology.
Well, again, definitely agree. I think security token is really kind of interesting and actually really promising use cases. totally agree with that. So I think today we were looking into all these token spaces, security token or commodity token, and or currency. I think security is a real kind of use case that can be first disrupted, from an industry perspective. So liquidity is not there yet, but I think it's going to come in the coming years. But tokenizing assets, digital kind of traditional assets using security token, that makes a lot of sense. Another thing that really got me interested is gaming. I think gamers are naturally attached to some sort of tokens or rewards. And if you can bring those traditional kind of gamer rewards into crypto and crypto space, I think that's a massive kind of consumer base you can bring into the crypto world.
Back on the bad mic. There you go. Just to make it more fun and be a little bit negative against some of my other panelists. I think the securities token market is a very short-term view that misses a lot of the long-term intent and potential of the technology. I think we're looking at how do you take an incumbent concept like a stock in a corporation, and you're looking at this and saying, well, how do I bring that into a new technology that is decentralized and that is the blockchain? There's probably going to be a market for that for a short number of years. My long-term view is, in fact, that blockchains and decentralized networks should fundamentally change the way we structure corporations, not simply be a new vehicle to represent the same asset classes that we've had historically. I think we have this unique opportunity on top of decentralized systems to reinvent the way we organize people, to reinvent the way we build products, to reinvent the way we interact with the market that will probably look very different than the way we used to interact with the market. So a lot of this early talk about securities tokens is kind of saying, well, how do I build a stock exchange on top of a blockchain? And I think it misses the point that a blockchain enables us to think beyond the stock exchange. It enables us to think beyond the corporation towards things like decentralized autonomous entities that start building products and services in a way that's never been done before. And so you really want to look downstream at applications of the blockchain. I think most fundamentally, those applications are going to be the change in social structures, the change in corporate structures, the change in government structures that are possible as a result of decentralized networks. And that might be the 10 to 20 year view, and we may be talking about, hey, what's going to happen in the meantime? I think we're constantly, and we come from the enterprise background. We have the same challenge when we're working in the enterprise blockchain industry. The common theme was, how do I take an existing business process and build it on a blockchain? It missed the entire point. The blockchain is not there to reinvent existing business processes. It's there to challenge and redefine how we do businesses. And I think, the most impactful businesses and the most impactful applications of the blockchain are going to be net new. They're not going to look like anything we've ever seen before. And so it's difficult to predict what those are going to be.
Just as a side, that reminds me of that commercial that maybe we've all seen, where the record executives were all sitting in the room thinking of how they can combat, this online sharing. And someone said, let's have a subscription service. And they said, well, how's that going to help us sell more CDs? Doing something a different way with the new technology is something that we will see.
Yeah, exactly.
I think totally agree with that. I think it's less about just company, securities representing corporate structure, but really even in a fully decentralized world, I think the concept of investment is still going to be there. People are still going to invest their money into something, and whether that's equity or a bond or derivative or whatever new kind of financial product that can actually be enabled in using the technology. So I think that's really the it's less about utility versus security in terms of regulation. It's really kind of tokenized investments that can be enabled by the technology in ways that we probably haven't imagined today yet.
Blair wants the mic back.
Just as a counterpoint on the security tokens, I do believe that the security token is a big advancement for the securities industry. Largely because it's not necessarily that's a innovative way of using the blockchain, but it is making the securities industry function more efficiently. It makes transactions happen more quickly. It's a great way for companies to raise money. Once the liquidity issues are solved on security tokens, I think we're going to see a lot of companies moving to a security token as a way of raising money. And it's also a great way to record ownership, as we've seen in so many instances. Securities is a great example of how the blockchain can improve ownership tracking and transactional movements. This question is also a great opportunity for a shameless plug for Blocpal. So Mike had mentioned that when he talks to investors in cryptocurrencies, they don't talk about that investment as investing in a currency. They talk about it as investing in a commodity or a share or something that will increase in value, and that's the utility of the investment. What Blockpal is trying to do is create more utility for that cryptocurrency, allow you to use it actually as a currency. So I think that's an exciting innovation on our part. And then I'll probably have an opportunity to touch on it a bit later, but I think that there's also great opportunities in the medical field. When I was first asked this question, I thought Philip sort of circulated these questions beforehand, and I wanted to answer the questions not just from how blockchain is going to improve society, but how is blockchain going to improve my life personally. So I'm going to talk to you a bit from a very personal perspective. And in the medical field, my wife was diagnosed with cancer a couple of years ago, and while she was going through her chemotherapy, we couldn't travel anywhere because they didn't have access to her medical records, and if something had gone wrong, they wouldn't know which medication she had taken, at what point she had taken them. Blockchain is going to solve those problems. I don't know that we're necessarily there yet, but blockchain is going to be able to solve those problems. We will be able to go travel if there's ever, God forbid that there is ever another incident with my wife. But that's a real world example of how blockchain will improve my life.
Blair, pass it on.
Thanks. So typically when people ask about like what are applications of blockchains or where do you see it kind of happening, I think there's a lot of hype around kind of where blockchains are used and where they aren't used. I feel like people are using blockchains a lot in fields that necessarily don't need them. And so over the time that people kept asking this question, I kind of came up with 3 sort of metrics to look at when you're thinking about applications on the blockchain or what kinds of applications. Like obviously it can go across industries, but in my opinion or in the work that I've done, there's 3 kind of purposes that a blockchain application has. One of them is to remove middlemen or like rent seekers in between transactions. So any kind of industry where you're, for example, something like a peer-to-peer marketplace, right? Where right now you have an organization like Uber or Airbnb standing in the middle of that, kind of like benefiting and getting fees between 2 transactions between people. You would remove that organization and you would allow people to transact directly. The second use case would be wherever you need to rewire incentives. So one really cool application in that field is this company with consensus called Civil. And they're a journalism company, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to rewire incentives for sharing news so that people are rewarded for sharing the truth rather than for sharing clickbait articles. So this is something that right now, the whole thing with fake news and all that sort of stuff is going on is because people's incentives for sharing posts and sharing news is messed up, right? So that's what the blockchain is going to fix with crypto economics. You're rewiring those incentives. And then the last kind of use case that you can really see a lot in sort of the corporate world with like things like supply chains and things like that is just to have, and even things like the Shift network is doing that with like AML and like KYC work within banks, is just to have more transparency and traceability between multiple organizations so that they can share information and they can basically have efficient communications between each other. So I think the applications of like what specifically is going to happen, I think it's going to happen across many different markets, but these are the kinds of problems that blockchains can solve.
All right, I'll throw another one out there, and maybe this is an opportunity for those who haven't given shameless plugs to talk about your own products, but what do you see that's currently around, whether it's actually launched, but currently people are talking about, that's a little different, that really gets you excited? That's that any of you have actually seen and want to share?
A little bit on the topic, but I'm still, anyways, you can hear me, hope. We had a company out of Tel Aviv just we had a company out of Tel Aviv yesterday called Clan Play just announced their launch of their new product that's going to be built on top of the Aon blockchain. And Clan Play is a really interesting marketplace for gamers who are playing inside of. Right now, they're supporting Clash Royale, Clash of Clans, Fortnite, and PUBG. So for those of you who are in kind of the mobile gaming space or the gaming space in general, you might be familiar with these games. And essentially, they're creating this like secondary layer above these games to build tournaments and to monetize those tournaments. And so they've got about 2 million subscribers today. They're actively engaged in these gaming ecosystems, and now they're creating this kind of monetary layer on top where you can reward people for their performance in a tournament. You can reward them for loyalty in a game for a particular amount of time. You can get people to coordinate their clans and their guilds and whatever. And for those people who aren't in gaming, all of this sounds kind of like irrelevant to the real world. But I think what we've seen in gaming historically is we see a lot of early adoption of new technologies in gaming right before they start to impact real people's lives in real ways. So, I see gaming as a really big signal that if gamers are starting to do this, we're probably just a short number of years away from normal people starting to do this. And so we're really excited about Clan Play. They're already available on iOS and the App Store if you want to check it out.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I mentioned about gaming is it was one project that we are working with. It's called Infinite Fleet. It's essentially a massive player game, a multiplayer game, and the game studio is pretty much all ex-Blizzard and EA. So one interesting, early on I mentioned that there's a lot of the gamers are naturally familiar with the whole reward and token system, and one thing they are trying to do is today we are talking about ICOs or ISTOs. So what they are trying to do is kind of gamer token distribution, and what it is in the traditional gaming world, you actually before you build the game, you actually sell the properties in the game before 2 years ahead of time. So players actually reserve those all these sort of crazy equipments for a lot of money even before the game is built. So that model sounds familiar, right? and this is so that's what they are trying to do is. Before building the game, distributing the actual equipments using tokens, and then later on you will get the tokens and then exchange the tokens for other equipments and sell them. That's all happening in the traditional gaming industry. But now you are using blockchain and tokens to try to provide an even kind of better user experience and make it exchangeable across games other than just within a single game.
Well, me old-fashioned, but I'm still really excited about Bitcoin, and my approach to this, G, and what it's going to do. My belief is that the best blockchain projects are the ones that keep their focus on the infrastructure. We see a lot of tokens that do certain things, and there's a lot of everybody is always talking about the next token and what it's going to do and what kind of application it exists within. But I've always taken the view that blockchain or something like Bitcoin is an infrastructure technology. It's a way of getting the cost of producing security and trust down to the level of essentially toys. Because we're talking about computer chips that we use to play our video games with, in the sense of GPUs, and ASICs in the sense of more specialized mining operations. And this really opens up the ability of the public to contribute to really important infrastructure in our society. Money is one of the oldest technologies that humanity has ever invented, and a lot of language actually stems from the need to keep track of our stuff. The first examples of writing we have in human civilization are lists of things that we had in essentially our mud huts. So it's really, it's really important to the social fabric of society to have an accurate accounting of who has what stuff. And Bitcoin achieved that in a totally new way. I mean, we used to use, seashells and gold coins, and so that is somewhat decentralized. But then, we in the 20th century, we moved into the age of central banking. All of this was taken over by government centralized institutions who have issued these currencies that have lost, 90+% of the value that they originally started off with. And now we can achieve, these authoritative records of accounting without any centralized people or institutions involved in that process at all. And that is the real disruption of blockchain technology, is in the removal of trusted authorities, rent-seeking institutions, middlemen, who we rely upon to manage and secure that infrastructure. The security model is completely upside down now. Right now, most incumbent institutions are building, what they like to call a walled garden or a black box where the data goes in, they secure it, they pay for the servers, they secure the servers, they take the risk of data loss. And now with blockchain technology, we can disperse this across the entire planet and have anybody anywhere contribute to this, essentially the social fabric. And that is something that has never happened before. And I think that is what, when I see somebody implement blockchain technology in that way, it doesn't matter if it's for money or securities or insurance contracts or something else. That is what is going to change the world.
I'm going to ask another question, sort of based off what's been discussed. You mentioned that there's some factors of where blockchain is actually useful and where you need to cut out the middleman. So at Miller Thomson, we have our firm's built on traditional clients in traditional industries doing traditional things, and often when there's a blockchain or cryptocurrency question, it's like it flows down to me, and someone will call and say, hey, my client in whatever business, traditional business, asks me questions about blockchain. Should they implement blockchain? And I speak to them, and they're telling me how somebody sold them on, put your back end on blockchain, do all this kind of stuff, and they say, and I ask the first question, why should you do it? Like, why? And they're, well, it's trustless and decentralized and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, well, does that really apply? Do you need that in your business? You have a operating system right now, you have a server, and it's working for you. What's the advantage of doing it this way? Well, it's the new technology, and someone's hyping it up. So I'm going to ask the question to you guys. What, aside from the hype of, it's just going to move into blockchain, where do you really see it being used, that it's actually applicable? Blair mentioned medical. Where do you guys see this actually happening, as opposed to just it's the cool new technology, so everyone's going to adopt it?
I think it takes 10 years for people to realize Bitcoin is not a hype, right? I mean, it takes a lot of time for people just to realize a simple concept. Not really simple, but simple, right? So I think just from adoption perspective, it's, I mean, in terms of what makes sense, I mean, decentralization is not something. I mean, people are so used to a centralized world. Just all of a sudden, decentralization is possible now. Now let's all go decentralized. It just doesn't make sense. So I think real applications will really come from actually solving a real world problem that exists today. So it's not some sort of invented problem. Imagine a decentralized world, it's going to be better. I don't think that will work. It's going to be, we have a real problem right now, whether it's in medical industry or traditional supply chain industry. One project we're working on is kind of maritime shipping. And the company, I can't disclose the name, but the company we are working with, every voyage generates about 300 emails, just for all the different stakeholders to coordinate. That's a real problem, that is so inefficient and hasn't been disrupted. I think those are the type of things, you need to look into and solve it in a way that it makes all the stakeholders' life easier, actually better than before. And the blockchain is part of the magic. So I think that's kind of how you can, get adoption.
I'd like to add something as well. So kind of the way that you guys should look at where blockchain is right now, I'm sure a lot of you have heard this already, is internet or websites when they first happened in the 90s. And so I think so at that point when websites were coming out, it was really impossible to think that something like Twitter would exist, that something like Instagram or Facebook would exist. So those applications didn't exist yet because the technology was so new and people were just trying to figure out basic problems of how to solve or how to scale that technology. And I think that's where we are with blockchain right now. So I think a lot of the development or a lot of where a lot of the focus is for now, for the next maybe 5 to 10 years, is around making the blockchain more user friendly. So having better user interface for it, where companies like Status are trying to put the blockchain on mobile, or like having better user interface, and then scaling it so that you can do large transaction throughput, so you can actually have large applications running on the blockchain. And so companies like Aion and Cosmos and even the Ethereum core team are working on things like that. And I think once we have our technology and infrastructure up to a point where it can handle a game-changing app, that's when you're going to see applications that maybe we can't even think of right now, and they're going to change the industry at that point.
Just another perspective. I think what's missing often is, the elephant in the room in most of these conversations, and the fact that the businesses that are trying to apply blockchains are the businesses that will be disrupted by them. and it's it's a tough conversation to have, and it always seems so far out, and it seems so unlikely, and it seems so unrealistic when you start talking about what are the banks going to do with decentralized payment systems. Most of the business models that internet-based companies exist on today, whether this is like targeted advertising based on consumer data or SaaS models of selling subscriptions online, these business models didn't exist 20 years ago. And so a new market, and a massive market, like the world's online market, evolved with business models we could never have predicted. And so to think that somehow this new technology is going to fit into a business model that we didn't know existed 20 years ago and now is the main business model of most organizations around the world is just how meaningful this is going to be. You look back very quickly, there's a fund in New York called Placeholder Ventures. I encourage you all to go read their investment thesis. It's a really, really great, easy read online. And their investment thesis starts all the way back in the 1950s and kind of looks through the trends of technology, saying, what happened to commoditize something that used to be the proprietary business model of a company? From computing chips to operating systems to publishing to eventually now data and ownership and distribution. So Microsoft's business model was massively disrupted when Linux provided a free open source alternative to an operating system. This is what we're about to go through again. We're going to see these massive proprietary business models that have monetized on data, and all of a sudden data is going to be commoditized. Data will be free to access. Data will be owned by the user. These business models are going to implode. And what that means is that the companies that operate on those business models are either going to have to massively transform themselves, which in many cases means that they're going to drop dramatically and maybe pick back up. And we've seen this happen with Microsoft over the last 10 years or so, or they're going to go out of business. Some of the largest Fortune 500 companies, not even Fortune 500, look at the top 5 market caps in the world today. These are businesses that didn't exist 30 years ago. So to suggest that they're safe, that they're protected, that Google is going to continue to be one of the largest companies in the world and Amazon's going to continue to be one of the largest companies in the world, would have said the same thing of Barnes & Noble and IBM 20 years ago. And we have to remember that. We're at that stage right now. The next evolution of companies have not hit the market yet. So it's not about how are the banks going to apply this. It's who's going to be the next bank. Because Google is now more likely to be the next bank in our lives versus RBC. Because they're starting to put payment solutions into the market. They're starting to do things that we never would have predicted. So, that lens would maybe help shape some of the conversation for these customers.
If I could quickly add to that, I know that we only have a minute left or so, but I think the utility of blockchain technology also depends on where you are in the world. Sitting in the developed world and talking about how blockchain technology can benefit us is a lot different than sitting in the undeveloped world, thinking about how blockchain technology is going to change. It's great to talk about fractional ownership of real estate and cruise ships, and those are great ideas, but that's not how the developing world is going to use blockchain technology. One of my favorite economists is Hernando de Soto, and he wrote a book called The Mystery of Capital, and the thesis of his book was essentially that the affluence of a country depends on its ability to protect private property and wealth accumulation. 2 billion people in the world don't have access to financial services. That's where blockchain technology could make the greatest impact. We could give access to that 2 billion people to financial services, allow them to protect their private property, allow them to accumulate wealth. And I think that's where we'll see the greatest gains to society.
Thank you very much. And I think with our timing, that's probably going to wrap it up. So thank you guys, and we'll leave it to the next speaker.